All right. Hello, friends. Liz Bannish from the Center for Contemporary Printmaking in Connecticut, coming at you here from my apartment in this first teaser video for what will be a series of online learning programming for our printmaking community and also for our new students. So soon we'll be rolling out a series of online workshops for folks, but in the meantime, we thought we would create some of these small little videos where we kind of show you what we've been up to in our home practices and kind of let you in on maybe some things you might want to try yourself. So this is what makes up my home studio. It's this desk right here. And I have had to amend my process ever since we started this lockdown. As someone who prefers to make art with all the bells and whistles and all of the intense processes, obviously social distancing and being in self-isolation means that I can't go to the studio and use all the rad heavy-duty equipment that I usually want to. So that means I have to turn back to the more honest, salt of the earth methods of printmaking, and this involves woodcut, basically. I feel like a lot of folks are turning back to the woodcut medium now, which feels, obviously a product of necessity, right? Because it's very accessible. But also it really fits the moment because woodcut has very historically been used in many moments of civil unrest and the dissemination of popular and working class propaganda. So it's kind of the moment that it should see this resurgence. So I'm just going to show you how I've been doing woodcuts here at home. I have been doing semi-photographic processes by creating images in Photoshop and printing them out on my laser printer. So I have here a couple examples of this image that I'm going to be doing today. Basically, very simple, use my cell phone to capture, and sorry about obviously my computer quality, but use this image to capture this picture of myself, my phone to capture this image of this very popular engraving, the skeleton from this very popular engraving from this human anatomy book that I have at home. And then this fallen palm tree is just an image that I took off, I think, like a Florida news website. So I cobbled these all together in a very simple collage in Photoshop, and I have created this image that's going to be honestly very little cutting time when I eventually get to cutting. There's a lot of black area, so it should be relatively painless, knock on wood. So yeah, so I basically cobbled this together in Photoshop, and then I printed this out on my kind of old school Brother toner printer. It's probably a model from the early 2000s, I think. I got it from an old job. And it's kind of part of my mini office, but I've been using it because you can use a household iron to transfer your photographic image onto your block so that it cuts out time with drawing and using transfer paper and stuff like that. So before I get to that point though, I do want to prep my wood surface. And basically the wood that I'm using is, this is birch plywood, it's 1/2 inch. I think this even came from Home Depot a few years ago. I do not recommend always going to places like Home Depot and Lowe's and you go to pick up your wood, just because the stock can vary so much because their suppliers just could be anyone at any given time. It's basically the lowest bidder. But this is a pretty good piece, I can see. I recommend trying to go for like A/B plywood if you can, A one side, B the other, and then just cutting down your blocks according to the good side versus the bad side, and then deciding which side to cut on based on that too, right? So I'm gonna, before treating my block surface and transferring my image, you do wanna check to see which side of the block is the good side. So you just check it for knots, check it for any chip out from the cutting of the saw. And yeah, it's pretty easy. This is obviously the clean side. So I'm gonna prep this side first. I'm just going to use some 220 grit sandpaper on the sanding block. These sanding blocks are really great, lightweight, hard rubber. They come with these 2 flaps on either end that when you pull them up, there's these sharp nails. Can you see on my crappy computer? There's these sharp nails that hold the sandpaper in place so that you just basically, after you cut it into some strips, which basically all I do is I take a fresh sheet of sandpaper and cut strips according to the sanding block size going the landscape direction on the sheet, because this length right here is the perfect length for the folding over that you need on these blocks. Cut it to width, and then it's just as simple as lifting up one of the flaps, and sorry, it's kind of awkward to show it on this camera, puncturing it on one side, use the flap to press it down, protect your fingies, and roll it over to the other side and repeat. There you go. So this is going to help you keep a flat surface while you sand. You want to avoid sanding with just your bare hand and sandpaper, just because you don't want to accidentally create like a divot or a dip where eventually you're going to see like in the printing. So, you know, you don't also even need something so specialized as this. You could just use a woodblock or anything that's flat, just curl the sandpaper around it. I'm just going to orient my woodblock so that the grain is going this way for me, so that when I sand, I'm sanding with the grain. You don't need to sand with too much pressure, and you know, it's obviously plywood, so we don't even really have to do that much. This is just sort of making sure that there's no little errant bumps or chips or anything like that. It's also going to help uniform the surface a little bit, which is going to help later with our image transfer. Just so there's not so many peaks and valleys that you have to contend with when you're trying to iron this image onto the wood surface. So just ironing it with the grain. You also want to take your sanding block and go off the surface of the wood, so you're not just stopping inside of the wood area. And then I even take my block and I do a little bevel. So that's also going to help clean up the edges and reduce, like, you know, just any ragged edges. You don't want to sand too heavy on those edges either, because you don't want to create a wonky edge, but just a little bit of a bevel is very good. I'm going to take this, well, I took this little clean dry rag just to wipe off the sawdust. So now this guy is ready for transfer. And I have this printout of mine that I've cut to the width of my block. It's just going to help with the positioning. And I just have these two pieces of masking tape on the top to hinge, and on the bottom to act as just like kind of a latch or a lock when I transfer. So you're just going to position it where you want on the block. Don't mind this circle drawn on the back. I want my figures to be a little bit up on the block, so I'm just going to position this a little bit partly up so I have more space on the bottom than the top. Tape it in place. So yeah, so all there is to do now is just start ironing. I'm going to take this, there we go, can you see? There we go. Okay. Move this cup. There you go. All right, so yeah, so I'm just applying some light pressure. You do want to apply some pressure. And I'm just taking the tip of my iron here, and I've got it on the highest heat setting. Obviously, I'm not steaming. And I'm just gonna like bear down a little bit as I just make multiple passes over the same small area. And you might even kind of like spin your block a little bit to get a different direction. And you're eventually gonna see your paper kind of change color where you have ironed. So when you tape the top here, this is going to help you because you're going to want to check your progress as you iron. How are we doing? Ooh, we're doing good so far. I'll pull it back a little bit so you guys can see. Actually do a little bit more. Okay. see here the transfer starting. You'll notice that my paper is starting to rip, but I'm not even actually going to worry about that because the toner is actually really stuck onto the wood. So I'm just going to leave it and continue ironing. When I'm done, I can remove that paper by then wetting this block a little bit, and rubbing the paper very gently. And that's going to leave the toner and reduce the paper to, you know, a pulp and wash it away. So I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. I was going to continue ironing. I do have this in the highest setting. It kind of depends on your iron, I suppose, like whether or not it's appropriate to do that. And if it's gonna like burn the crap out of your paper or whatever. So you definitely probably want to test in a small area. And it's also worthwhile to mention at this step that I have my windows open and I'm doing this with a nice cross breeze in the house. You are reheating printer toner, which is made of styrene and other plastics and other chemicals. So you definitely don't want to do this in a super enclosed space. And also some printers work better than others. Like I said, or I think I mentioned earlier, my printer is like an old school Brother toner printer. So I know that the toner in those printers works really, really well for these sort of transfer processes. The more recent printer models don't have the best transfer abilities from my experience, but definitely worth an experiment or two. Let's check that again. Oh, looking good. So you're just gonna pull gently, right? But again, no worries if the paper rips. So starting to see the skeleton legs coming out here. Okay. I'm going to pause this and resume, so I'm not going to make you stand by and have me have to pontificate too much while I'm filling in the air while I iron. So to be continued. Okay, so I am back now. I have ironed my image completely to my block, and if you've done this right, then this should happen. So initially, the tape that was there to keep us from misregistering is no longer needed because at some point the toner is just gonna be sticking. So you know, make sure that you don't care too much about this. So yeah, I'm just pulling this off now, and in the areas where the paper doesn't want to move, which are in several places, then what you can do is just take a slightly damp sponge, squeeze out the excess water, and just dampen the paper. I never like to flood a wood block with too much water. Just don't want it to warp, but let's get the paper nice and wet until it starts falling apart. And you can start just scrubbing it off. Okay, so you actually, what some people might want to do is err on the side of over ironing your sheet so that it does completely stick to this to the block, because what you can see is in the areas where the paper really stuck, the toner transfer comes in extremely stark and clear. But for me and my purposes, I just need it as a guide. So even this ghostly type transfer right here still has all the information that I personally need to do my cuts. So for me, this is very successful. However, for many other people, you could definitely push it and get it to the point where you are transferring the whole density of the toner. And what that means is you're just going to be using your iron on the absolute highest setting, and you're just gonna iron the absolute crap out of that paper until it's just the whole thing is completely stuck to the block. Your block is gonna get hot during this process, so you're gonna want to have to do that on a surface that can deal with that. So obviously this wood surface is fine. So yeah, so after you get your toner down, the last thing to do is stain the block, and that is going to allow me to see where I've cut and where I haven't cut down the line. So if you stain your block a nice red on top of this black, then you will later, when carving, you'll see the raw wood color come through and the red remaining where you haven't carved. So it just makes things a lot easier. And that is just very simple. Again, trying not to introduce too much water to the block. I do use red watercolor paint right now. What some woodcut artists probably notice is that I'm not shellacking my block right now. I'm not sealing the wood or anything. That's just because obviously in my small apartment, I can't really use shellac or alcohol in here. So I'm just, letting the wood grain show, which is what happens when you don't treat your block. You're just going to get a little bit more of a pronounced wood grain in your prints where the blacks are. And I think that'll actually be kind of nice for this print, so I'm willing to accept it. So yes, I just mix a little bit of alizarin red, alizarin crimson, watercolor with a little bit of water just to loosen it up. And then I just blot it a little bit, because you don't need too much. A little bit more water there. A little bit more water. And I'm just going over the whole surface of my block. Just a very light coating. And if you apply too much, you can even wipe it down. Okay. Sorry, definitely zoned out there. I'm staining my block. So I will just zoom in on a little detail here. So this is our nicely stained block with our image transfer on it. I'm so sorry for my computer quality. You really can't see what's on here. But so I'm just gonna let this dry completely before I start carving. Again, this is gonna end up, adding water to the block like this. It's definitely gonna end up with a more pronounced grain in the resulting print, which obviously I am completely fine with. I'm definitely embracing that right now. So yeah, so this is basically how I've been treating my blocks before I start carving. And the next step that I would take after this is I would start tracing all the outlines of my lines with a X-Acto knife or a sharp, box cutter or whatever. And then I would begin gouging out my whites. So thank you for watching. I hope this was informative, and I hope that this wasn't incredibly awkward. A videographer, I am not. I'm just a humble printmaker. So thank you for watching, and stay safe out there, folks, and keep printing.